Welcome to the Postpartum Performance Podcast. If you're here to be empowered and encouraged, you're in the right place. I believe every woman deserves to learn who's in her corner, which is why this podcast was created, to share encouragement and intentional conversations around women's health, nutrition, and wellness for new mothers. In each episode, we will discuss ways for women to find truth for her health, to feel strong, and to be confident from the inside out. I'm your host, Dr. Lindsay Peczkowski, a performance physical therapist with a passion for teaching others about pelvic health and guiding mothers to build movement, confidence, and strength. I'm a lover of running and weightlifting and a healthy cooking enthusiast. All right, ladies, grab your coffee and settle in for an episode of the Postpartum Performance Podcast. Are you with me? Here we go. Hey ladies, welcome back to the Postpartum Performance Podcast. Today we are in for a treat. This episode we're going to be learning about pubic symphysis separation, and we'll be getting to hear from Tenley Leopold about her personal experience with SPD during her pregnancy and postpartum journey. So let's dive into this episode. We're going to start with a big picture view talking about SPD, pubic symphysis separation, as well as common symptoms and what to do about your symptoms before we interview Tenley. The incidence of diagnosed SPD is 1 in 300 pregnancies, though some people think that it's about 20% of all pregnant women will experience some form of SPD. They're not always diagnosed. And many times these symptoms begin during pregnancy and they tend to resolve quickly after birth, but that's not always the case. If you have pubic bone pain and it doesn't go away and your doctor tells you that you have pubic symphysis separation after your delivery, there are things that you can do to treat those symptoms and to have reduce the pain, feel stronger, and feel more stable with that. So let's start with, what is even pubic symphysis separation? It's something that not a lot of people are talking about, but it is something that, like we said, people are experiencing. About 25% of women are experiencing this in their pregnancy. It's the widening of the pubic joint, which is right down at the base of the pelvis. It's kind of that connecting piece. And it's considered, when there's more than a 10 millimeter separation or widening, and it's considered a complication with vaginal childbirth or pregnancy. So if you put your hands on your hip bones, and then if you were to guide your hands all the way down, you can feel that kind of hard bone right down between the legs in the front. And that's your pubic symphysis. And so then the actual pubic bone, and then the pubic symphysis is that connecting piece between the right and the left part of your pelvis. So a very important piece that when there is that ligament laxity, there's going to be a little bit more give, but if it's a little bit more separating, that really makes a difference when you're transferring and moving different positions and moving around, because it's transferring the load from your upper body and lower body. And it can be uncomfortable because it's requiring other muscles to stabilize or do different things, and it can not be really comfortable. So we want to talk about what you can do during that. So where do we even begin? So during pregnancy, a big tip that I give for a lot of women is to actually shorten your steps when you're walking. If we're taking really big steps, that can provide more stress to the pubic symphysis, especially if you're feeling some of those symptoms. Just try even shortening your steps a little bit and see if that helps. Some other things you can consider are a belly band. And this one, you want to be mindful, though, where you're placing the belly band. You want to place it lower at your hips versus higher. If you're placing it higher at your hips, it's going to help stabilize for your SI joint. But with more compression up at the top, it's going to basically put more of a opening stress down at the pubic symphysis. So be mindful of that when you're using any of the belly bands. You want to make sure that it's supporting you, so you can kind of play around with different positions, but in general, it's better if it's a little bit lower for pubic symphysis. So other strategies to try: diaphragmatic breathing. This is great for calming things down, but also where you're diaphragm and your core system and those deep ab muscles, that transverse abdominis. We want all of that working together and helping stabilize throughout your body. So you want that 360 breathing all the way around. And this is going to help with letting those muscles do the work that they're supposed to do and allow for better stability when you are doing different activities. So starting with that can also help just like relax those areas as you're experiencing any symptoms and to rest during those times. So doing like 3 to 5 minutes of diaphragmatic breathing a few times a day can be really helpful when you're doing the correct order of events of having that big expansion, 360 breathing all the way around the rib cage, through the belly. And then as you exhale, you're bringing awareness to those deeper core muscles and pelvic floor. Another helpful exercise to do is transverse abdominis isometrics. This one, for some women, can be uncomfortable postpartum, so be mindful of that as well. You want to imagine that if you were putting on a tight pair of pants, when you're exhaling, you're bringing that belly in close to the spine like a corset. You want to be able to try to hold that muscle contraction for 3 to 5 seconds, ideally on that exhale. And that helps with getting that contraction to happen. Trying about 5 to 10 repetitions a few times a day. If you are very recently postpartum, this can be very challenging to get that connection with that TA. If you are still pregnant, think about hugging your belly or hugging your baby. That is a really helpful cue for the TA contraction for that. And with all of these things that we're talking about today, if you have questions, please reach out or reach out to a pelvic health PT. We'll be able to help you go more in depth because some of these cues work really well for some people and sometimes they don't. So we have other strategies that we can do, but these are great places to start. So you've done some diaphragmatic breathing, you've done some gentle TA isometrics, and then you want to also add some gentle pelvic floor isometrics. So contracting that pelvic floor, ideally on the exhale as well, like you're trying to stop the flow of urine or holding back gas. Or some people will think about if they're picking up a jelly bean with their vagina. So those are some cues that you can use for a gentle pelvic floor contraction. They're an isometric. And you're going to repeat that 5 to 10 times, a few times a day. The minimum effective dose for Kegels or pelvic floor contractions is 30, according to the research. But be mindful of this too, that you're actually relaxing those muscles as well. It's one thing to contract them, but making sure that you can fully relax them. Especially with the symptoms of SPD, a lot of women will want to clench their pelvic floor or their abs or their glutes because they want to provide stability. But if they're not allowing those muscles to relax, they're actually doing a disservice to themselves in creating a better stable core and using that core for their more dynamically. And then the last exercise that you can try are just gentle glute isometrics. So squeeze in your butt a little bit, 3 to 5 seconds, 10 reps, and do that a few times a day as well. That's going to help just strengthening all of those muscles in that pelvis area, but making sure that you're doing it differently from the pelvic floor contractions because it's a different group of muscles. So those are just some general kind of places to start, especially right after childbirth. If your doctor does say that you had some pubic symphysis separation. This one's also just really helpful to do if you're having some symptoms during your pregnancy that's a little bit more intense on certain days. I would recommend at least starting with these and see how you do, and then you can always progress from there. So a good rule of thumb when you're doing different activities in different positions and you're starting to get symptoms, or if you want to reduce the symptoms or minimize the symptoms, if you feel like you're starting to develop some discomfort kind of at that front of the pelvis area, it can feel just like shifty or uncomfortable. Some women have kind of, it feels like a tearing or a wrenching pain. And it's more in the pubic area. And for some women, it can actually go to like upper thighs and into the pelvis a little bit more. But those are some common symptoms that people will describe for SPD. So when you are doing different activities, a great rule of thumb is to think about wearing a pencil skirt. So think about those skirts that are a little bit tighter around the thighs too. So those pencil skirts really allow you to keep the feet and legs together a little bit more. And that can help reduce the symptoms because your legs are a little bit closer. So it's not putting as much stress on the actual pubic symphysis. So over time, you'll be able to tolerate more movements with your legs. So it's not saying that you always have to have your legs so close together. But when we're separating our knees, that can create some tension through the pubic symphysis, causing pain for some women. So over time, you'll be able to kind of bring your knees a little bit further, a little bit further, a little bit further as you're doing these activities, but only move as your pain allows or your symptoms allow. So an example would be when you are getting in and out of bed, you want to use the log roll technique, which in the show notes, I'll include a video of that. So you have that technique, but ideally this is great for if you have pubic symphysis, low back pain, if you're pregnant, if you have diastasis, it's just allowing for your spine to stay in a neutral position and then really not putting a lot of stress on those other areas. If you need to, when you're getting in and out of bed as well, you can put a pillow between your knees. That can also provide a little bit of relief and support as well as you're doing the log roll technique. And then when you're sleeping, this one as well, you can lay on your side and put a pillow between your legs. This can be helpful, or a little bolster behind your back as well to maintain that position rather than kind of rotating or putting any torsion or twist on your pelvis during those times. Another thing to try to avoid when sleeping, which I know it's kind of hard to avoid when you're sleeping sometimes because you just fall asleep, but to avoid like the frog leg position where that top leg crosses over the bottom one, that can cause some discomfort for some women if they're already experiencing sensitivity at the pubic bone. And then for getting in and out of a car, thinking about that pencil skirt analogy. So you're going to want to, if you're getting into the car, open the car door, back your body into the car onto the seat. So the back of your legs are perpendicular to the seat. And then you're going to sit down by hinging your hips back. Exhale as you bring your legs into the car. You may have to, in the initial stages, use your arm to help support and lift your legs in, but over time, that also should improve. And then with getting out of the car, basically you do the reverse. So you're going to keep your knees together as you lift your knees and lower them out of the car as you turn. And then using the car seat to help support and push off as you come up to standing. So lifting up your baby. So this one's important when you're postpartum, is to keep your legs a little bit more narrow or square to the surface that you're lifting from. Think more of like a narrow stance squat rather than a really wide sumo squat when you're doing these for lifting your babies, as well as considering more of that hip hinge can be helpful. So you're going to hinge at your hips and let your knees gently bend to come to the height of the surface, whether that's picking up from your crib, from the pack and play, from the ground, just being mindful of all of those positions. And when you're doing all these lifts and transfers, this is something that your deep core, you want to be aware of. What's the pelvic floor doing? What are that transverse abdominis? How's your breath work doing as well? So all of these things, many different components that come into this one, but being mindful of that, because as new moms, you are doing a lot of different positions and different tasks that your body is asking you to do that's new, and you want to be smart with your movement. So for those ones as well, if you have questions on that hip hinge or just like lifting mechanics, please reach out to your pelvic health therapist or to myself, and we'll be able to give you some more guidance with that. With walking, like we said before, shorten up those steps a little bit more. If you're having pain with walking, try to be mindful of that core engagement as well. If need be, I have had to work with some clients that did have to use walkers and crutches at some point, and that may be required to help manage the pain, especially after initial injury. But long-term, they are able to walk and do all these things afterwards, but it's just that initial time. And then for stairs, you want to try to go if it's too painful to go up the stairs normally, like facing forward, you can try going up and down sideways. One at a time can decrease the stress to your pubic area. So for example, if you have less pain on the left side of your pelvis, lift the left leg onto the higher step. And then moving forward from there, and also using a railing for support, especially if you're carrying your baby. So that was also a helpful one. Trying some of the different positions, going sideways, up the stairs will be helpful. So now that we know a little bit more about SPD and how to address some of the symptoms, we're going to go into our interview with the lovely Tenley Leopold. So a little bit more about Tenley. She's San Diego based, and she stepped onto the scene appearing on ABC's The Bachelor, finishing as the runner-up. She continued to look for love by chasing roses on 2 more Bachelor franchise shows. It turns out it didn't take chasing roses, as she's now happily married to her husband, Taylor Leopold. Tenley and Taylor just recently welcomed their baby girl, Rel, to the world. Tenley loves to share her life stories, lessons learned as she navigates each season, especially what she's learning as a new mom. She's a certified holistic nutrition health coach and a former professional dancer. She also loves to share her love for health and wellness and simple and attainable tips and tricks to living your best life. With the desire to share a little bit of hope each day, you can find Tenley candidly sharing via her Instagram. So I'm so excited to have Tenley join me on the show today. So here we go. All right, Tenley, welcome to the Postpartum Performance Podcast. I'm so excited to have you on. We've been talking about doing this for quite a while now, and I'm just excited to finally have you on the show. And I would love for you to share a little bit with the listeners on more about who you are and what you're up to right now.
First of all, I'm so honored. Yes, I met you because I just want to give a little backstory. I met you because my chiropractor through my pregnancy, and still, had shared your podcast with me. And so I started listening to it. And then I was like, I actually need to go see Dr. Lindsay for myself. Yeah. And then, I'm so honored to actually be a guest, and we have been talking about this for a while. Mm-hmm. My name's Tenley, and, man, my life looks a lot different than it did a few years ago. But a lot of people who've been watching Bachelor for many years, because I'm kind of old news, that's where a lot of people remember me from. It was part of my life, like three times. I finally met my husband outside of the show, and didn't need that to find him, but I'm sure that God had that all part of my story, or used that in a way. And it led me to my husband, Taylor. We live in Carlsbad, very close to you. Mm-hmm. And we have our first baby, who is going to be 10 months very soon. And it's just flying by. Yeah. And so now I'm actually a holistic nutrition health coach. And I am currently still taking a long break from seeing clients. And I don't know when I'm going to return to seeing clients one-on-one, but that is a bit of who I am and my passion. But now I'm full-time momming while doing a little bit of the Instagram blogging life on the side, or kind of full-time job at the same time as being full-time mom. But I'm so grateful to be able to do all of that. So it's a little bit about me.
Love it. Love it. And so we'll just start kind of diving in a little bit on what you had come to me for. And I would love for you to share your experience, because you had been getting chiropractic care and just like during your pregnancy and kind of planning for more of a pretty active pregnancy and different things like that. And then you started to experience some symptoms, which is kind of like the topic of our discussion today about like pubic symphysis, separation and like pain and stuff like that. So how did your symptoms kind of come about, or how was your pregnancy to start with?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great starting point. So I am so excited for your audience to be able to hear this conversation, because I wish there were so many more resources when I was pregnant. I just wanted to know more about what I was experiencing, and not feel so alone. So I've taken to Instagram to share a lot about it. So basically my pregnancy started off, I was feeling great. I mean, like a little bit of I feel like I've been on a boat for a little bit in the first couple of weeks, but I never got sick. Pubic. And we actually found out that I was pregnant 4 days before we left for Europe. This is in the beginning of 2020, before the world shut down. And so we had this nice little secret, like when we were off in Europe, and it was such a surprise to us, by the way. And I was feeling good, except for I do remember a couple of days with jet lag in Spain and Switzerland and not feeling 100%. But that was the majority. I was still like running. So being as active as I usually was, doing my bar classes. And like nobody would have known anything was different for me because I was still doing my normal thing. About 14 weeks pregnant, all of a sudden, I think it might have even been sooner that I mentioned, maybe at my 13-week appointment or something like that. I had mentioned to my doctor when we went in to go check on the baby's heartbeat. I don't remember all of that or the order of that, but I had mentioned something about like my bones down there hurting. That's basically how I described it. And he goes, yeah, that's normal. And I was like, okay, all right, it's normal. He's all, just listen to yourself. And I love my doctor, but I will say that I feel this way about nutrition and health and lifestyle as well. But like sometimes you just have to find experts or people when it has to do with giving yourself a leg up or changing what you're doing. So he basically was like, that's normal. Just listen to your body. Okay. So I'm out running, I was at that time still running 4 to 6 miles or whatever, which is a great passion of mine, my soul food. And all of a sudden I could barely even walk. And like, I remember getting 3 miles and turning back to go to my car. And I was basically hobbling all the way back to my car. And I was in tears. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, basically wanting to crawl to the bathroom. And I was in so much pain. I was like, I just didn't realize that this was actually like something that women in pregnancy actually experience. I thought something was wrong with my body, like I had pulled a muscle or done something wrong. And thankfully, somebody shared with me to go see a chiropractor. And I fell into great hands and great care. And somebody who specializes even in that season of life. And she helped me on a weekly. I started out like even seeing her twice a week. But what I wish, and I want to share with your listeners, is that I wish that I had come to see you during my pregnancy as well. I wish that I had added that to my weekly. I didn't realize. I just was looking for anything, and at the moment that was keeping me out of a wheelchair. So my symptoms. Basically a very, very extreme pain. It's so hard to describe down in my pubic bones, or like, I'm just going to be as, narrative as possible for women who are trying to understand, or anybody's trying to understand, like basically what I would describe as my vagina bones. Like, you guys, pubic bones, I didn't really realize where, what, however, like, I just don't know that part of anatomy as well as we as women probably should, or as well as you do, because you're a doctor of that area. But I just felt like they were breaking, and basically made like laying even on my side, which is recommended in pregnancy, to be laying on, I think, prominently, or like your left side, I think it was.
Yeah, usually, but
yeah. And even with a pillow, I bought all the pillows. I basically would build myself a fortress as I would sleep or try to sleep at night. But I couldn't walk. I couldn't sit. I could not sit at my desk. So I wasn't getting anything done. I couldn't stand for very long. So just like, I don't even know how those days or weeks even got by, how I did anything. I just don't know. I didn't get much work done. It was really hard for me to see my nutrition clients at the time because sitting still or being focused, I sat on a ball a lot. But yeah, the ache. And then I also have, from being a dancer back in the day, I have some dance injuries in my hips. And I'm guessing that has not helped in the stability of what was going on. So anyways, symptoms were, my hips ached, my bones down there ached. I could barely sit, stand, sleep, lay. I was not comfortable. I did not spend my pregnancy laying on the couch. Like, I would have loved to have rested and just watched some movies when I was feeling tired. Yeah. And I would sleep maybe 2 hours a night on a good night. So my wish is that a whole bunch of women will feel empowered or know that this is normal, but doesn't have to stay this way. And they'll go and see pelvic floor therapists sooner than later, get the right chiropractic help and care, and know that they don't have to go through their whole pregnancy feeling that way. And I felt like with the help of Dr. Anna, my chiropractor, like I was able to stay ahead of, like I shared when I started telling my story, is a lot of women I've heard have ended up wheelchair bound because it is that excruciating and debilitating. But anyways, it took away from my what I thought would be an active pregnancy, stepping forward, stepping back. So lunges were out of the question, anything kicking back or kicking forward. So there was very limited, ways to have that active and healthy pregnancy that I had desired. So anyways, that's a long-winded description. And I'm just I hope we can learn a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's great to hear like other people's experiences. And we were talking beforehand. So I'm 30 weeks pregnant now, and and I had the other day jumped off a boat, not really like silly thing to do, but jumped off a boat, and my legs, I spread them apart farther than I was expecting to. And getting back on the boat, I felt a little like, oh, this doesn't feel awesome. And I'm concerned that like because of that ligament laxity and just positioning of where those are, like where our bones are and how we're stabilizing and different things, I was getting some mild symptoms of some like pubic symphysis, like dysfunction, and like just it didn't feel good. And so that alone, I was like, okay, so even just like little moments like that, let alone like for you, it was like constant, at some point, but being mindful of positions. So different tips and things that we talk about is like modifying, whether that's stepping a little bit shorter, so not jumping off boats with like a big like leap, and just like shortening that stance. So avoiding some of those like lunges and the things like that you had to stop doing, but trying to find ways to like narrow your stance and do different stabilizing stuff can be helpful. But it's person dependent though. Cause again, for some people it's pretty consistent and constant with pretty much any activity that they're doing. And some people it's like, oh, only when I turn in bed and get out of the car, or, like certain things. And so being aware of that too, that you might be experiencing some of these symptoms in maybe more or less of the intensity, but being mindful of kind of how you're addressing that as well is really important.
Yeah, I will say I'm so glad you're okay. I'm so glad you're not
like,
having
less. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Oops. But at least some exercises. I will say again, I really truly do think that I was as uncomfortable as I was, and I would have loved to have solved it and fixed it completely. I do think that staying as much ahead of it as I possibly could, getting that chiropractic care to help with those, like you were saying, like all the laxity. How do you say that word?
Yeah.
And like the elasticness of my body wanting to move with the hormones and everything, preparing for baby to make its arrival, like being able to have that chiropractic care. But like I said, I will stress again, I wish I had started to come see you through my pregnancy before, because the postpartum stage was hard as well. It was very discouraging. When I met you, I was still very discouraged. I was like, I've had my baby. I want this to go away. Yeah. So anyways, it's just a wild thing. So if anybody's listening out there, I just really just want to stress, like, get care. And it does feel expensive. I'm going to be honest, feels expensive taking care of yourself, and some insurance can take care of that. I just really don't want any mama to be held back. If that is something that's intimidating, if you can make it happen somehow, it's going to help you. That's all I have to say on that.
Absolutely. And pubic symphysis separation or dysfunction is something that can happen during pregnancy and postpartum. So for some women during pregnancy, it's pretty prominent because baby's there. There's a little bit more added weight to that part of the pelvis, and just there's a lot more things changing and shifting and growing. And then for some people, it's after more like labor delivery that they have some dysfunction, depending on the size of the baby or how their birth experience was. So be mindful of that as well, that you might during your pregnancy not really have symptoms. And then postpartum, you could have some symptoms, and there's ways to address on both sides of the coin type of thing. So being aware of that, I've worked with some women that have had to leave the hospital with walkers and things like that because of that. It's the connecting piece of your pelvis. And so when there's separation, it makes it really hard to transfer load or to step. And so that can cause a lot of discomfort, dysfunction, and things like that. But to know that there are ways to treat it, that even if your doctor's like, oh yeah, it'll go away, or give it a few weeks and you'll be fine. Be mindful of that if you're still having those symptoms, go get some help.
Be proactive, but give yourself lots of grace. Can I ask you 2 questions?
Yeah.
Well, if I can remember the second one. The first one is like, so because you kind of started talking about like the, weight of baby. And then we've also talked about hormones, but like basically like what exactly causes this, I call it SPD. I know that there's several different formats of this diagnosis, let's say. And then I mentioned also my ballet injuries, like my SI joints, like not being very durable. They always are moving and shifting. So that might have had something to do with it. What really causes it? And is there any way to not get it?
It's tough there's a lot of different factors. So with our pelvis, we have like the 2 like iliums, or those 2, like if you think about like the tops of your hip bones. So those are coming together, and that point where they kind of are fused together by the joint is your pubic symphysis. So the pubic bone, and then in between it is like cartilage of the pubic symphysis. So that area, it's a widening of that spot. So during pregnancy, there is going to be that natural laxity that we were talking about. So that can cause, just with hormones, that in addition to, so then your sacrum or your tailbone is on the backside. So it kind of makes this like bowl pelvis shape, or for our pelvis. And so if there's any laxity or past history of some of those things, that things aren't as stable as we would like them to be going into it, can contribute. It depends on where the baby is sitting, where your uterus is, where even like posture, that if we're leaning a little bit forward, that's going to put a little bit of pressure there, versus tipping all the way back. But it's a lot of kind of like contributing factors that can lead to some of the symptoms and what you're doing day to day, that for some people, and it's so person dependent and pregnancy dependent, because for some people, their first pregnancy, they're fine. Or their first pregnancy, it's like, holy cow, what just happened? And then second pregnancy, no issues. So it's really, really, I'm praying for you for that. It's really tough to like pinpoint, it's totally this or it's totally that. But also for some women, it's more on the postpartum during like after childbirth, that things have to expand, and more naturally our bones are created to kind of shift and allow for baby to exit for a vaginal birth. But sometimes it can be maybe their position was a certain way, or their head didn't turn the right way, that they just slightly caused a little bit more involvement to that area on their way out as well. So it really is a lot of different things, which is kind of tough to say like, oh, this was the cause. And obviously if there was something that specifically had happened leading into like, for example, like my jumping off a boat type of thing, or like something like that, where you can like, I didn't have things going on until that moment, that sometimes can be more specific. But for a lot of people, it's a lot of little things that can contribute.
Yeah, I definitely had a lot of those little things feeding into it. So thank you so much for sharing some of that. Because sometimes I just still like, I'm like, and I would love to prevent it for next time, which is amazing that I'm even saying next time. I've shared a lot about that with like, people is that somehow God is totally like restored even just like my memories of pregnancy. It was so hard. I mean, I'm sharing with you how I don't know how I was existing as a human, but I look at pictures and I'm like, oh, it was such a special time. It's so beautiful. Like, I'm so happy for you right now, like in your pregnancy bliss, and just like how magical it is. It's like seriously like such a miracle. And now holding this baby that I have, my baby girl, like, and just thinking of like, I would do this again. Like, thank you, God, for restoring and redeeming that, like that area in my heart. But at the same time, it terrifies me too, because now when I'm pregnant again someday, if that happens, then I'm not just going to be able to just be me. It will be me and my babe. Hopefully Rel will be old enough by the time we have a second. But yeah, it's scary. But I do want to share with people that it didn't traumatize me that much, that because a lot of people are asked like, will you have it again? Will you be able to get pregnant again? But that's all a whole different story. Like,
Yeah.
you know? And I don't know if I'll have it again. And then a lot of people also asked, which you were sharing a lot about, like, when I was pregnant and sharing that I had it, people asked, will I be able to deliver vaginally? Would my doctor introduce any, like, recommend going C-section? But my doctor actually is very, very modest about C-sections. I'm grateful for that. He didn't even, I continued to keep him posted with, I'm in so much pain. And he was like, sorry, but like, he was like, he was not phased. His job was still to get that baby out healthy, and keep me healthy. And I did not have a problem with a vaginal delivery. He never ever said, hey, because of this, we should entertain C-section. So I don't know if there's something that's like, you hear a lot about doctors actually encouraging women to have C-sections with this, or.
And it depends. I feel like it depends on the doctor for sure. And usually unless they have like a certain reason to, or there's other factors going on that they would recommend a C-section. But a lot of times if the baby like is okay and like certain things, they're going to try to do more of like the vaginal birth usually in those situations. They'll probably at least let you know, like, yes, your symptoms may change or be a little bit more, you might have more symptoms after baby, but once baby's born, like eventually things will kind of be restored a little bit too. And so it depends on that and kind of their experience with it too. But in general, a C-section is such a big, it's a huge abdominal surgery.
Yeah. It's a whole different game.
It's huge. And with thinking about what's going on for like the pubic symphysis area, and then if you were to have a C-section, that's a lot of compromising like core and pelvis and hip stability, because it's addressing then that they're cutting through the abdominals and all of that area. And that area already is getting put under a lot of stress if the pubic symphysis also is moving, is like a little bit more widened and things like that too. So it could make actually recovery almost harder, even though like the labor part of it and like the delivery is like, oh yeah, we'll just, do a C-section, and then the recovery side of it. So be aware of that too. And just like talk to your doctors if they bring it up and ask and kind of see what their technique is too. Cause there's different techniques for a C-section as well. So just educate yourself, ask the questions. And if you need to get a second opinion, even if you do trust your doctor, just ask more questions, because you want to find the right fit for you and your baby.
Absolutely. I'm really glad you actually talked about like how recovery could actually be a little bit more intense. Obviously you mama and baby or doctor, you've got to do whatever you got to do to keep mama and baby safe and healthy. But so one thing that, a lot of people were asking is, well, should you maybe just do a C-section? And maybe it would have been a quicker way for baby out. But let me tell you, it's going to hurt no matter what, you know, it's just, there's a baby coming out of your body out of a very small area. Your body knows what to do. It's really magical. Anyway, so I didn't have to go that route, but it was interesting to me that people ask that so often. And also I would think that that whole area down there was even more like stretchable or elastic, because I'm actually producing, you know, enough of that extra relaxin hormone, right? To cause the SPD or whatever you want to call it. And so therefore, you know, there comes baby. It wasn't like that, but
yeah. And that makes such a difference too. And even like knowing, like for you with the history of dancing, being more flexible and being more mobile and different things, and looking to potential second pregnancy at some point, or just in general for stability of still like you're running now and other things like that. Thinking more on like, okay, what can I do now to strengthen and stabilize, regardless of having another pregnancy or not? Thinking long-term, okay, if I can do some of these stability and stabilizing things, because for some women, they're just naturally more mobile and more like bendy. And whether that's from training from a certain sport or activity, or if that's just like genetically, that there are some people that are just like, I'm super like double jointed and I'm super bendy. And so in those situations, if you already know that you are like that, or if someone's ever told you that, to strengthen and stabilize as much as you can prior to, that's going to help, because the hormones are going to happen regardless. Like your body needs those to build your baby, you know, and have baby grow, and all of that stuff is naturally going to be happening. But if you're able to do that and start kind of pre-having and like preparing for that pregnancy, or just preparing for an active lifestyle again, that can really help kind of combat that as well.
Awesome. That's really helpful. I kind of wish that I had done a little bit more like reformer Pilates, or even like the type of PT that you helped me with and stuff like that. I wish that I had done more of that before I got pregnant, and definitely before we try for number 2. Hopefully I can get ahead of that.
Yeah. That's always my rule of thumb for people. If they're looking to have, if I'm working with them during their first pregnancy, is that you can basically train for the next pregnancy, you know, and being able to prepare your body for pregnancy number 2 is really important, because it takes a lot. And rather than thinking of like, oh, well, if I have another kid, then I'll take care of myself after that next pregnancy, which doesn't always help, because it's you need to prepare for like and strengthen yourself.
But I know so many women like that, because they just think, well, I might as well repair it all later on. But if it sounds like you are encouraging what I would say too. If you can do whatever you can to continue to keep yourself healthy, you're just going to feel better as an all around, just taking care of yourself. But if you can kind of rehab to prehab,
exactly.
Sounds right.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. So I would love to hear a little bit more about what does your exercise and movement routine look like now? And like what type of exercise? So, you know, you had mentioned that you love running and that's kind of like your soul food. So that brings you joy, but what right now have you been kind of focusing on, if it's running or other forms of exercise, now that you're feeling a little bit better?
Yeah. So finally I am running again with a stroller and without a stroller. So oftentimes my husband, if he's home during the day, working from home, if Rel is napping, you know, I'll go out for a quick run, and feels so good. That's when I go aim for like more of a 5-mile run. I've only done, I mentioned that before I was pregnant, I was running like 4 to 6 miles a day. Well, I'm averaging now 4 to 5, which is amazing. After postpartum. And, you know, I find myself taking deep breaths down into that pelvic floor, like you taught me. And because sometimes I do feel that soreness kind of set in, but I am able to do it. So I'm still running with Rel in the stroller. We get a good 3 miles in before she's like, Mom, I'm done. And then I love bar. I was a bar instructor for a long time. So I do my studio bar on demand. My sister-in-law is actually one of the teachers on there. And so I do a lot of that when I don't make it out to run or need just like that extra and that core and that strengthening. But I still have yet to make it back to a good old hot yoga class. It's been a while, but I'm loving being with my baby. So
yeah,
I don't.
She's adorable.
She's so much fun. I just cannot wait to find out if she's going to have a little boyfriend. We don't have to set them up, or a girlfriend.
Yeah, I know. He's so
little
fun.
buddy.
Be perfect. Perfect. So last question before we wrap up. What advice would you give to a new mom if she is struggling to find healthy habits or a new routine as a mother? So from your experience, what advice would you give to a new mom?
Well, I think this one hopefully goes without saying. Just give yourself a whole bunch of grace. You are in the newest, most unique season of your life, whether or not this is maybe your second or third child. Like every new phase of pregnant or of being a mom is a new phase. So give yourself grace. One thing that I wish that I would have done is rested even more in the beginning and soaked her up as a baby even more. But I went straight back to like working with my brand partnerships, and we had a lot of family filtering through the house. And honestly, like as much as I wanted at my family members and Taylor's family members to hold my baby, I also wanted to hold my baby. So it's okay to go ahead and say, I'd like to hold my baby now. And then the other thing is, that people want to offer help. And oftentimes they're like, let me come over. And I just still haven't figured out how to say this. But one thing that I wish that I had figured out how to have courage to say is when people offered to come over to help, like hold my baby so I could shower. That's not what I needed help with. I needed help with like, could somebody maybe run out, grab me a few groceries or offer to those kinds of things. I wanted to hold my baby. And I just think that that's okay. But it's also okay to share too. There's a lot of people in your life that are going to want to hold your babies, but a lot of grace and just finding courage to say what feels right to you. And then there's going to be the moms that also probably feel like, please hold my baby. I want to go take a shower. So, and that's right too. I just feel like finding your voice and having courage in it is probably something that I will continue to work on. But that I wish that I'd also given myself a little bit more, a heads up on.
Oh, I love that. That is really good advice. We're actually, Dave and I are kind of trying to navigate that, like establishing what boundaries we want to have when people are coming into town visiting, or just friends that are local and stuff visiting too. Because I want to ask for help, but I also want to make sure that I'm not like
hosting.
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm much of a hoster and stuff like that too. So being aware of okay, it's like, is this because I'm trying to make them feel better, or is it because we actually need the help, or we actually like need some of that support and encouragement, and how that looks? Like you said, for you, it was like, no, actually, I'd rather someone do some errands for us rather than, hold the baby while I shower. Like I can go in like a couple more hours without showering or something
when
like
the baby is taking a nap or whatever. So I'm glad you guys are already talking about it. It's so hard because we had family from out of town too. And of course you want them to meet your baby within those first 6 weeks, but it's also, our birth coaches, husband and wife, had really encouraged us to take those 6 weeks for just us. It was not possible, but what could we have done differently? So I'm glad you guys are talking about it.
Yeah. It's a big thing for any new parents to start at least having those conversations, and with your partner, but then also with those family members that you got to let them know, which is maybe tough. That's the tough stuff. Yeah. You got to make sure that they're in the loop on all of that.
I will add, we live in kind of a smaller space where to have people congregate in our home doesn't really offer it's just not very helpful in that sense. So maybe if we lived in a bigger home where there was more room for people to congregate, but I could also step away with the baby or whatever I needed, could have helped that situation too. But yeah, so next time we'll see.
all the things to navigate, but like taking it, like you said, with grace and having that courage too, to speak up, just so important. Oh, I loved our conversation, Tenley. Thank you so much for being on the show. Such a light and an encouragement for women just to hear your story and to hear your vulnerability in the process. I know you've been sharing a lot on Instagram with kind of what's going on and how things are going and how you're developing and progressing, all of those things too, which is so important for more people just to hear about what's going on. So if people want to connect with you, if they either have more questions on your personal experience or just want to kind of see what you're up to, where's a great place for people to find you?
Instagram is a place that I feed into daily. So my handle is Tenley Molzahn. So my maiden name, Molzahn. But I think if you look it up by Tenley Leopold, it should pop up. But yeah, Instagram still won't let me change my last name on there.
Oh my gosh.
That's funny. It's been there for so long that maybe that's why, I don't know.
That's so funny. Well, perfect. So I will include that in the show notes too, so that people can give you a follow and see what you're up to.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome, Tenley. Thank you for being on the show. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Postpartum Performance Podcast. I appreciate you taking the time to listen, learn, and grow. If this is your first time tuning in, thank you so much for being here. The aim of this podcast is to provide oodles of the best possible content to help empower women, eliminate the phrase, "I wish I would have known sooner" around pelvic health, and to encourage personal growth through the postpartum journey to becoming the best version of yourself. If you enjoyed the show and found the content helpful, please remember to subscribe to the podcast and leave a 5-star review. These subscriptions and reviews help other mothers discover the podcast. If you're a regular listener, thank you. I encourage you to tell a friend about us or post on social media sharing your favorite part for today's show. If you're looking for more content like this, please follow me on Instagram at Postpartum Performance. Remember, mothers, if you're seeking to live life strong, I'm here with you in your corner. Continue to be brave, stay strong, and live confidently.